Hello, good afternoon everyone. My name is Ike Picone. I'm a professor in media and journalism at Vrije Universiteit Brussel. And it's my great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, someone I had the privilege of inviting to join us here at the Brussels Institute for Advanced Studies as a senior fellow. Professor Edson Tandoc is President's Chair Professor of Communication Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, where he serves as Associate Chair for Research and Strategy at the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information. He is the founding director of NTU's Center for Information Integrity and the Internet, and currently chairs the Journalism at the intersection of emerging media technologies, news credibility and information integrity division of the International Communication Association. He brings a study of nearly a decade of research on media and disinformation across Singapore and Asia more broadly. Taking a break from his well-deserved sabbatical to be with us today, Professor Tandoc will guide us through the evolving landscape of mis- and disinformation in the Asian region, from the lessons of the COVID-19 infodemic to the new challenges posed by generative AI. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Edson Tandoc.
Thank you very much, Ike. Good afternoon, everyone. Very, very happy to be here. First, I would like to thank the BRIAS program for this opportunity. I've been attending the Big Ideas for Democracy talks over the past few weeks. Fascinating presentations. So I think some of the previous speakers are still here. They've set the bar really high. So for a change, I think what I'll try to do today is to try to set the bar a bit low. So. Oh, this is being recorded. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, I'm already here. So Sylvia, Emily is away. They can't do anything. Anya, sorry, you have no choice. You're stuck with me for this afternoon. So what I'll try to do today is share with you research that I've been doing on disinformation and fake news and misinformation and other related terms. Participating in the BRIAS program has given me the opportunity to reflect on what I've been reading, or what things I've done for, as Ike said, almost a decade now, and also think about what we still need to do, the things that we still need to learn, and things that we need to examine. So I thought I'll start, by reflecting on how did I get into this line of research. Before pursuing graduate studies, I worked as a newspaper journalist. And during my PhD, I was naturally drawn to examining the intersection of journalism and emerging technologies, looking at how news production and also news consumption are evolving. Until one day in 2017, I think that's my third year at NTU, I was scrolling on Facebook and I came across a post. Let me introduce you to my high school math teacher. Brilliant person. Most of what I know about algebra, I learned from him. He was, I think, head of the department at that time when I was in high school, also a very religious person. When he became active on Facebook, he began sharing posts from other accounts, many focused on religion. And one day in July 2017, I was on Facebook, where I spent too much time back then until now. And I saw a post that he shared. It looked like a news article. So there was an article, there was a headline, there was a photo, there was a short caption and a link to a web page. And the headline said, "Lucifer is God declared by Pope Francis." I think there was a sub-headline saying that, Pope Francis is actually the devil. You don't need to be religious to see how ridiculous that is. So I reported the post to Facebook. I also messaged my math teacher. I tried to explain as respectfully as I could. After all, he taught me algebra, and I'm still not good with algebra. I explained to him that I didn't understand, why he shared it, and that he shouldn't have shared that because, it could mislead others. And there are many of us in our village that look up to him. He replied that he didn't believe it, and he shared it because he was unsure. And he said that, my caption is actually, that's why I wrote in my caption, is this true? So in my head, I was thinking, well, did you really need to ask this? Why would you even be unsure to begin with? And I understand at some point my math teacher might come across this video on YouTube. So if he's watching, I want to tell him that interaction on Facebook clarified something for me. After 2016, we had elections in the Philippines, elections in the US, Brexit referendum. We were all talking about fake news. And that moment showed to me how the problem trickles down into daily life, involving people we know and we trust. The effects are personal and real. And during COVID-19, we all experienced this. We saw the effects at scale. People believing in non-scientific home remedies, panic triggered by messages circulating on WhatsApp about lockdowns or shortages of basic supplies. We experienced firsthand what fake news could do. And this problem is not easy to tackle because telling what is true from what is not true, what is real and what is not real, it's getting harder and harder. In my earlier studies, I would show participants these two photos and ask them which one is real. Can you tell which one is real and which one is not? Okay, I won't ask show of hands, but it's never easy, even for those of us who consider ourselves to be, quite well-versed with technology or well-educated. With AI, such difficulty has been magnified. And a big reason for this is the way we encounter information has evolved so much. I work as a newspaper journalist at a time when many people still read physical newspapers, and that kids knew what a physical newspaper looked like. And at that time, journalists had a lot of control over the range of information, the quality of information, the accuracy of information reaching the public. Now with social media, everyone can perform acts of journalism and have access to a mass audience without the layers of accountability and gatekeeping that mark traditional journalism. Audiences now can also curate their own media diets, deciding what to follow and what to ignore. So when I taught basic media writing, a required class for first-year students at the Wiki School of Communication and Information, I would begin each semester by asking my students how they came across news. So I'm showing you a graph from one of those surveys I did in 2023. You see that the most frequently used method was TikTok, a platform not originally designed for news. And our school admits the best students in Singapore. We have a very high quota for grades for admission. And these are students training to become media professionals. But this is not isolated. I'm also showing you the 2025 results of the Digital News Report for Singapore. And we see that online and social sources dominate as the main sources of news. And this is especially true among younger audiences. For them, the feed is the front page. The thing is, those who produce and spread falsehoods know this and exploit this. In 2018, we conducted content analyses of articles from websites flagged by third-party fact-checkers in the US as fake news sites. Our goal was to see how much these articles tried to look like real news. At that time, a lot of research was being done focused on the fakeness of fake news. We examined its newsness. To what extent do they try to mimic real news? So we assessed those articles using what we considered as traditional journalism standards. We found that to a large extent, fake news articles were very good at mimicking real news. And the topics that they chose, the sources they attribute or invent, even in their news values and rituals of objectivity. For me, the most striking finding was format. More than 98% of the fake news articles that we analyzed actually use the inverted pyramid. And those of you who have a journalism background or teach journalism would know that inverted pyramid is a unique storytelling structure for news writing. Right? It's something that is more pragmatic rather than stylistic. And studies have also demonstrated that it's not really the best way to tell a story. That's not how humans process narratives, but it's a practical storytelling technique. So it is unique to journalism and unique to news writing. But with this finding, either those who create fake news are very good at mimicry, or some might have had journalism training, right? And the thing is that mimicry continues today, and it is also evolving, especially with upgrades in technology and AI. And why do these people do it? because the incentives are strong. Some do it for money. If a post goes viral, it drives traffic to websites and private social media groups, which can be monetized through ads or sales. Others do it for ideology, to target communities, shape belief, damage reputation, especially in elections. And often, financial and ideological motivations intersect. My friends, Jace Cabañas and Jonathan Ong, both Filipino scholars, they mapped out what they called an architecture of disinformation, operating in the Philippines. This is where politicians with vested interests, they hire PR professionals who work with troll farms and underground operators to run disinformation campaign. This is profitable and sadly has also proven effective. The important question then is, why do some people fall for falsehoods? And a lot of this begins with exposure. Many of us now spend a lot of time online and on social media spaces where liars then propagate their falsehoods. But not everyone, as we know, exposed ends up believing. Still, exposure matters because it can lead to belief, and belief can lead to behavior, from unwittingly sharing falsehoods with friends and family, to acting on misinformation in ways that can be harmful, as we saw during the pandemic. So what links exposure to these consequences? That is an empirical question, which also forms the basis of much of our work. So in 2019, I received funding from the Singapore Social Science Research Council for a 3.5-year project that I had proposed. And I was fortunate to work with amazing co-investigators. I have 2 dedicated research assistants, James Lee and Seth Kai-Seeth, both deserve a shout out. We studied 4 things in this project. First, how different stakeholders in Singapore define what fake news is. Second, how they determine what is fake and what is real. Third, how do they deal with falsehoods? And fourth, are there any interventions that can emerge, from the insights in this project? In our study, we also focus on fake news as a form of disinformation, messages that were intentionally packaged to look like news with the intention to deceive. And the term is not new. Fake news as a term has been used for decades. And in one of my earlier studies, I examined how scholars across the years have defined fake news. Across these definitions, we saw some few common themes emerge. First, fake news always involves falsehoods. But this can range from complete fabrications to pieces that mix truth and falsehoods. But the net effect is still to misinform people. And again, related to that second is the intention. Intention matters. Fake news is created with the deliberate intention to deceive. And as someone with a background in journalism, I also emphasize and focus a lot on how fake news mimics real news. So a third element in this definition is the format. Falsehoods can appear in many forms, but fake news is distinctive, at least for me, because it gains a lot of its deceptive power by imitating the look and format of legitimate journalism. And often, as we demonstrated in one study, successfully. So where do we even begin to assess factors that make some people fall for fake news? So in this project, funded by SSRC, we relied on a very traditional, linear, dated model of communication that still provides some conceptual utility by outlining the different factors involved in a communication process. So this is from David Berlow's SMCR model. So we looked at characteristics of the source or the sender, the message, the channel, and ultimately the receiver. Here, I will share with you I try to be as quick as possible some of the empirical studies that we've completed under this project, and trying to tease out these different factors that may be increasing people's susceptibility to fake news. So first, in 2019, we compared the effects of political bias and cognitive ability on fake news beliefs, 2 factors that have been examined intensively around that time, although mostly separately. But measuring political bias in Singapore was challenging because the country has been dominated by one ruling party since 1965. So politics is far less polarized in Singapore than in many other countries. So for this study, what we did was we showed participants real examples of fake news that portrayed the ruling party negatively, And then we asked them whether they believe these claims, assessed their sentiments toward the government, and measured their cognitive ability using a critical reflection test, a validated measure of cognitive ability. What we found is that both political sentiment and cognitive ability predicted belief in fake news. People with more negative attitudes toward the government were more likely to believe anti-government fake news, and people with higher cognitive ability were less likely to believe in these claims. We also examined the impact of where you get your news from. We found that traditional media use predicted lower belief in fake news, while social media use was positively related to belief in fake news. And this is a pattern found not only in this study and not only in our studies in Singapore, but studies that have been done across many countries, that social media use play as a very significant role. In another study with collaborators in the US in 2020, we used panel survey data to examine what people knew about COVID-19 and their ability to detect COVID-19 misinformation. We focus on what scholars in journalism studies call news finds me perception. This is the belief that if something is important, it will reach you even if you don't actively seek the news. So this is something that has been gaining significant scholarly attention, and rightfully so, because of the implications, on democratic processes. When people believe that if something is important, it will come to them even if they don't specifically or actively look for it. What we found was that social media use increased this perception, and people who scored high on it were worse at identifying COVID misinformation and knew fewer COVID-19 related facts. Information overload intensified this link between social media use and news finds me perception. And in another study, also in 2020, this time in Singapore, we also conducted a two-wave panel survey in Singapore, and we examined the impact of news avoidance. There's also a phenomenon that is the subject now of growing scholarly attention in journalism studies, and also rightfully so, because again, this has democratic implications. So many people are not only consuming less news, but some people are intentionally avoiding news. And there are different reasons for this. Some say attending to news makes them feel overwhelmed. Others say that news does not feel relevant to them anymore. Others say news has become too negative. So in our study, we found that those people who score high in news avoidance, who report that they actively avoid the news, they were also more likely to believe in COVID-19 related misinformation. And this relationship becomes stronger for people who are exposed to misinformation related to COVID-19. In a parallel study, we found that those who believe in misinformation related to non-scientific home remedies for COVID-19, such as gargling salt water or eating bananas, were also more likely to report not only engaging in these misinformed behaviors, but they were also more likely to disengage from scientifically backed preventive behaviors like washing your hands or wearing masks. So again, establishing the real effects, of believing in fake science. Another key factor that we examined is how people respond when they encounter a claim. Like, naturally, you would expect that people would authenticate first, right? But do people actually authenticate? And this is important because with the shift of control from gatekeepers to audiences, authentication has become an individual level responsibility. At a time we outsourced everything to journalists, and journalists had control over what then is disseminated to the public. Now, audiences can go to the sources that they want, right? They are free to choose whom to listen to and believe, journalists or influencer, news site or TikTok, search or scroll. And with this control over our own information exposure and use, the question becomes, do we have the skills? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the time? And do we have the motivation to authenticate every single claim that we come across online? So in a study, we asked people what they do when they are unsure about a claim that they come across. Majority said they would use institutional forms of authentication, Googling it, checking other news organizations. But we're also seeing that authentication is also very social. More than 30% said they would ask family or friends. And most likely like-minded people, basically our own echo chambers. Still, authentication may lead to successful fake news detection. So the next question is, for those people who think they are detecting fake news, what do they do? Right? In one of our earlier surveys, this was from 2016, the first time we asked this, we asked people what they do when they think something is fake. When they come across on social media something that they think is fake news. At that time, some tech platforms have rolled out ways to flag a post, but you can also unfollow a person or message that person, like what I did with my math teacher, or just ignore. In the 2016 survey, more than 70% said they just ignore fake news. That number was lower when we repeated it in 2017. We see a steady decline. At the most recent surveys we've done, we were around, I think, 50%, still a little over 50%, still the majority. So decreasing trend, very encouraging, but the majority in our surveys in Singapore still say they ignore fake news. And there are many reasons for this. So when we did follow-up interviews, some said, well, if the fake news claim is not relevant to me, I'm not going to do anything about it. Oh, there's a post that says, oh, this restaurant sells radioactive sushi. I don't like sushi, so why would I even do anything about it? Others talk about not wanting to get themselves involved into unnecessary arguments or debates. Like, it's not a good use of my time if I'm suddenly fighting with a stranger I don't even know in real life. But others said, well, if it's someone from my aunt or my mom, how can I have the heart to correct them and tell them they're wrong, or they shared something that's fake that's going to hurt their feelings. So again, on one hand, there is the focus on relationships, but at the same time, knowing that something is fake and deciding not to do something about it is becoming part of the mechanism that allows these things to propagate, to spread. Others believe correction is useless because they think that once someone has already posted this, that means they believed in it. So if I say anything, that's not going to change their minds. So on one hand, we see some form of informational apathy. On the other hand, there is a belief that intervening makes no difference. That's why people don't intervene. And for me, that is worrying because if we go back to my math teacher, when I asked him why he posted something that was questionable, he said he wasn't sure. And my interpretation of his answer is that he posted it to seek social authentication. And this is consistent with some of the themes we've heard from our focus group discussions in Singapore. Some people said they shared content not because they believed it, but because they're hoping someone will say something, right? Again, using social media as a form of social authentication. So these are just some of the studies that I've conducted over the past several years to understand the factors that move people from simply being exposed to fake news to actually being influenced by it, either by believing in misinformed advices or prevention behaviors, or sharing and becoming part of the propagation process. But what I consistently find, from these studies as well, is that there are cognitive, motivational, and social factors that play a role in facilitating fake news susceptibility, at least based on studies I've conducted mostly in Singapore. In the Philippines, where I am originally from, fake news has also become a serious problem. So before President Donald Trump was elected in the United States in 2016, the Philippines had already elected, months before, President Rodrigo Duterte in an electoral exercise often described by scholars as a watershed moment for the weaponization of social media and the rapid spread of disinformation. Therefore, in one study that we conducted in 2021 at the Center for Information Integrity and the Internet, or InCube, we also surveyed residents in 10 cities across Asia, including Singapore, but also including other cities, and we asked questions about fake news exposure, use of fact-checking. One of the measures that we used was simply the self-reported frequency of encountering fake news. And for me, the results were eye-opening. At that time, we were all talking about the global scale of the fake news problem, but people's actual perceptions on the ground, as we see in the chart, varied widely. In Bangkok, in Thailand, Ho Chi Minh, and Vietnam, we have majority of residents saying they encounter fake news on social media often or always. In Tokyo, fewer than 1 in 5 did. And when I presented these results, one journalist from Japan was so surprised. He said that, that doesn't reflect what we hear on the ground. So he managed to convince his company to rerun the study. So we worked with him. We used the same instrument, conducted the survey a year after, not just in Tokyo, but in other cities. And we found exactly the same thing, very close to the distribution that we found. So again, demonstrating that the problem is global, but what people think they're experiencing on the ground, there's also some variations in that level of experiences. And this is why I thought it's important to look beyond just the individual. This line of research has also shown me that we must consider contexts within which individuals are embedded. You have temporal context, for example. We know that fake news thrives in periods of uncertainty, elections, crises, wars. There are technological contexts, because different systems shape what people see and how they encounter information, how information cascades. There are political contexts because governments and institutions influence the information environment, and sometimes some of these actors become propagators of fake news themselves. So using the same data set, we also conducted multi-level analyses to examine the impact of broader social and country-level conditions. And what we see is that fake news susceptibility is not just an individual problem, it's also very much a contextual one. To understand how forces beyond the individual shape people's susceptibility to disinformation, I only need to look at my home country, again, the Philippines. Technological constraints, technological infrastructure. For many years, prepaid mobile phone plans in the Philippines bundled free access to Facebook. So if you use it, and I've used this service myself, if you buy a prepaid mobile plan for, say, a month, usually they bundle that with a free Facebook access. I think they have something similar in India where they have a free WhatsApp access bundled with a mobile phone subscription. But these are, you don't have internet. You only have either Facebook or WhatsApp. So you could browse Facebook without paying for data, but you won't see images, you won't be able to open external links. And the effect, I think, is profound because for many people, Facebook or WhatsApp was the internet. Someone shares you a link, you think that looks suspicious, you might want to read it, you can't. You click on it, it doesn't take you anywhere. You only have Facebook access. Someone forwards you a message on WhatsApp saying that, there are like kidnappers in our village, these are strange looking people. You want to click on that photo or try to verify the names, you can't because you only have WhatsApp access. What others do is they look at comments. They rely a lot on the original poster, the caption that accompanies the message. You might want to Google it, check with other sources to authenticate. Again, you can't. Again, there are some technological constraints. Cultural context also matters. In the Philippines, we are raised to show deep respect toward elders, as in many other cultures. Our language even builds respect directly into our speech. We have a respect word that we attach to every phrase, depending on whether we're speaking to someone older than us. So if I see an older relative or a former teacher share something that seems untrue, correcting them may not be very straightforward. Even if I manage to have the courage to try to tell them politely that what you shared is wrong or untrue, the correction, how it's received, can still be shaped by cultural norms. Many might see it as being disrespectful and therefore dismiss the correction. And while these cultural and technological factors matter, another force complicates things: attacks on legitimate information institutions, including news organizations. Around the world, we've seen the rise of an underground economy of disinformation creators who gain attention, advertising revenue, political clients even. At the same time, some politicians have tried to weaken or delegitimize professional journalism, the very institutions trained to verify information. Some of these politicians have weaponized fake news as a term, to discredit legitimate journalists. In the Philippines, this peaked during the Duterte administration when the country's largest broadcaster, ABS-CBN, was forced off the air. Their license was not renewed by Congress. Overnight, hundreds of media workers, including trained journalists, those engaging in fact-checking, lost their jobs. So you have a situation where underground economies of disinformation are growing. They're becoming more professionalized, while newsrooms, on the other hand, fact-checkers, on the other hand, are getting pressured, defunded, or harassed. And when trusted institutions are weakened, this is where falsehood entrepreneurs thrive. All of this, technological constraints, cultural norms, political pressures, show that disinformation is shaped by larger systems, not just individual choices. And because of this, I also felt the need to look beyond my research in Singapore, beyond my experience with the Philippines, and learn from the experiences of scholars across Asia. Wanted to understand not only the common challenges we face, but also the unique contexts that shape how this information spreads in different countries, and what we can learn from each other, especially from what we went through during COVID-19. So I proposed an edited volume on fake news across Asian countries with the aim of bringing together insights from our research, not only from our research at InCube, but also showcasing case studies from across the region. And for this edition, I was able to invite chapter authors from at least 12 countries in Asia. And editing the volume allowed me to learn a great deal from their contributions, their reflections, their case studies, their findings. And together, these chapters highlight that disinformation, misinformation, falsehoods, these are not just individual level issues, they're very much a social problem as well. What became clear, again, is that the tactics, the context may differ, but we're also seeing patterns, narratives, strategies increasingly cutting across borders. From Thailand, for example, Chanapa Nunark describes an incident where a canal suddenly turned pink. So many believe the water was suddenly miraculous. There's a miracle, it suddenly turned pink, this must be a miracle, and people started drinking from the canal. The water turned pink because it was actually contaminated. And understanding this vulnerability requires consideration that within Thailand, there's a very large agricultural tradition, history rooted in agriculture, and therefore there is deep cultural reverence for nature, and including water. In Vietnam, Van Vu explains how collectivist culture can discourage nonconformity. When the social norm is to follow the majority, people become more likely to accept widely shared falsehoods. Related to that, in Kazakhstan, April Manabat and her co-authors discuss how the education system has also historically emphasized obedience over critical thinking. Students are expected to memorize, repeat what you read in books, not question what is written by these book authors and textbooks that we use in school. But over time, this produces generations of citizens not encouraged to question, even when they encounter falsehoods. In the Philippines, Fatima Gao shows how state actors themselves have become propagators of fake news, and this aligns with a broader pattern we see in other countries. In South Korea, Sang-won Lee describes not only how politicians label critical reporting as fake news, this is already a familiar tactic, but also how the phrase fake news has become a convenient alibi. In some cases, people dismiss allegations, politicians dismiss allegations by immediately claiming that's fake news, even before it has been established whether the claim is true or false. One particular interesting case also comes from Indonesia. Ika Idris and Ratna Arianti, they examined how hyper-local news outlets, struggling to survive, have partnered with a larger media organization, and because they receive support from that larger media organization, there's pressure to deliver audience numbers. So there's pressure to deliver metrics. And the result is intense pressure to publish as quickly as possible, to capture clicks. And that might be at the expense of verifying information before posting. And speed, becomes more important than accuracy. This is related to another volume that I'm co-editing for one section. My friend Ryan Thomas points out that even mainstream journalism can at times, become complicit and inadvertently contribute to the spread of disinformation. So again, across these examples, we see a recurring theme that disinformation is not produced only by fringe actors, but they can be facilitated, normalized, amplified by institutions. And fake news travels across borders as well. That's something I learned from this these book chapters. In the early stages of my research, when we were looking for examples of fake news, one case that we came across was actually from a Facebook group in the Philippines. So it was intended for a Filipino audience. Someone shared in that group a post that claimed that if you apply coconut oil below the knees, that it could cure dengue fever. And that claim eventually appeared in Singapore. We also saw that being shared in Singapore, and Singapore also deals with dengue fever. But we were also able to trace versions of the same message as far as Sri Lanka. So showing us that these fake claims, these fake posts, travel across borders. This shows how false narratives travel across borders, but once they arrive in a new setting, they are tweaked, adjusted to fit local beliefs, local health concerns, local cultural practices. Falsehoods become more convincing because they start feeling familiar. They start feeling culturally relevant and seemingly grounded in local experience. What we're seeing is not just the movement of false claims, but the movement of templates for false claims. Global misinformation and disinformation adapted to local realities. This is basically what we can call globalization of disinformation. So we see global themes in falsehoods, pseudoscience, miracle cures, vaccine falsehoods. These are larger, I would say, narratives, but adapted to fit local contexts. For example, in India, Retu Arya and Rubal Canosia show how vaccine misinformation was tailored to target different religious communities. So we've all encountered versions of how COVID-19 vaccine is, implanting chips, or can make people sterile, or not be able to produce children, or can make you sick. In India, there are some versions that said, there are traces of beef in COVID-19 vaccine, but other versions say there are traces of pork. In these vaccines. So both narratives exploited existing religious sensitivities, making them more persuasive to specific groups. In Malaysia, Bahia Omar and Nur Zulkifli also describe how fake news also spread through WhatsApp voice notes. Those of you who use WhatsApp, you might have encountered some friends, or you might prefer to use voice notes instead of typing your messages. I get these from some of my friends, and it annoys me. I'm like, there's a reason why I'm responding to you by text, because I cannot listen to the voice notes at this time. But apparently there are some communities where voice notes have really found a good use. So in Malaysia, that's one case. And in this chapter, they also talk about voice notes becoming a format that's used by those who spread fake news. And again, this shows that these people who are behind misinformation and disinformation, they're very aware of people's, not just what interests people, but also how people communicate, and they try to either mimic that or exploit that media behavior. Jatin Gandhi highlights another important point. In India, misinformation is rapidly translated into multiple languages. Given India's size, and linguistic diversity, this greatly increases the reach and the impact of false claims. One piece of misinformation can spread across multiple states, as long as they get translated quickly. All these, presents major challenges for intervention and detection. Global narratives gain emotional power and they are localized. And for fact checkers, monitoring misinformation becomes more complex. In India, if you want to fact check effectively, you cannot monitor just one language. You need to track many. And when you publish corrections, you also cannot produce them in just one language, right? And so to be able to reach different segments of the population, you require more time, more coordination, more resources, and we know that resources are not going into fact-checking anymore. Again, what we're seeing is that this localization of disinformation not only makes it persuasive, but also more difficult to contain. This brings me back to the model that I think is emerging from the research that I've been doing and the works that I've been privileged to be part of. There's something that I tried to put together in the past few weeks I've been here in this beautiful building in Brussels. So what I've been thinking about is, yes, individual factors matter, cognitive abilities, motivation, social relationships, they all influence how we respond to this information. But these technological, individual level processes, rather, are also embedded within larger cultural, technological, and political contexts. And once we recognize that, the problem becomes even more complex. We realize that people are not navigating this information in a vacuum, but within structures that shape what we see, what we trust, and how we act. That said, I can't be just talking about all the sad things in the world. Part of my research also tries to look at solutions, not just problems. Around the world, countries have tried different approaches. In Singapore, for example, Singapore was one of the first few countries in Asia, if not around the world, to introduce an anti-fake news law. The Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, or POFMA, passed in 2019, allows ministers to issue correction notices or take down orders to individuals, media companies, internet service providers, and even social media platforms when a post is deemed false and harmful to when a post is deemed false and harmful to public interest. We've run experiments, interview studies also to examine how effective laws like this can be. On the one hand, during COVID-19, the government issued a lot of correction orders and to debunk or correct fake news about COVID-19. But this has also been used to correct political messages, and of course, it has also attracted criticism that has become another tool, to in a way limit the range of expression in Singapore. We've also looked at how tech platforms respond to disinformation. In the beginning, if you all remember, many platforms have tried to evade responsibility. At some point, Mark Zuckerberg was quoted as saying, "No, Facebook is not a media company." But thanks to public pressure and advocacy groups, platforms have since introduced new tools and policies. WhatsApp, for example, added the forwarded tag to show when a message was not originally written by the immediate sender. Meta introduced new ways to report posts. At one point, they partnered with third-party fact-checkers to add fact-checking labels. But we are also seeing some backsliding now. In the US, for instance, some partnerships with fact-checkers have been scaled back. And of course, fact-checkers themselves are also doing essential work, but they face serious challenges. Questions about sustainability, concerns about public credibility, targeted harassment from trolls. Disinformation actors have even turned fake news narratives against fact-checkers themselves. In our center at InCube, we collaborate with two local fact-checking organizations in Singapore. We design studies, organize events to understand what works, how fact-checking can be strengthened, and how do we respond to how fake news is also evolving. Some of our initiatives focus not only on studying disinformation, but also on engaging the public and developing practical solutions. During COVID-19, for example, we wrote commentaries on vaccine misinformation. We organized webinars. I'm sure many of you have also at some point we were experiencing webinar fatigue, like there's just too many webinars, everything is online. So after COVID-19, we switched back to also holding in-person seminars that we open to the public, stakeholders, industry, policy partners. I come into our events and I see faces I don't recognize, and they just saw our invitation from somewhere. They're not even part of any organization, so even members of the public were attending some of our events. We tried to turn what we learned from our research into tangible interventions. One project is a fake news educational game that we call Fake News Detective. It's a web-based game created by the National Library Board and one of the local fact checkers in Singapore called Checkmate. It's still being improved. What we try to do is to update it with newer examples of fake news. It's a game that we target to children, so around secondary school. And once we've updated it, I'll share with you the link so you can also get to try the game. Another a major effort is in training and capacity building. You know, we've developed modules, curricula based on our research. The most recent initiative that I'm very excited about is a new program that we launched for student content creators in Southeast Asia. So we work with Temasek Foundation in Singapore, and in November, from November to December last year, we brought together 40 student content creators from 9 countries in Southeast Asia in a series of online master classes and also a week-long in-person hackathon in Singapore. We brought them to newsrooms, to TikTok. We assigned them mentors, and during the hackathon, they were given problem statements that they need to propose solutions for. You know, at a time when more and more of us get our news, entertainment, sometimes even advice from, not from traditional media anymore, but from influencers and content creators. I think involving these non-traditional media actors is important in promoting information integrity. But in as much as we're trying to improve the information space, bad actors are also innovating. You know, the problem is far from over, and you know, it's probably getting worse with AI. During the 2025 elections in the Philippines, for example, we saw a resurgence of copy-paste astroturfing campaigns. It is when you go online, you see the same set of comments appearing across multiple accounts, different groups. You know, the goal is to give the public an illusion that there is consensus about something. This is an example from the most recent senatorial elections. In the Singapore elections in 2025 also, we observed signs of bot activity. We were able, in one case, we monitored several accounts that used profile photos that showed different facial features, yet the images look strangely, eerily familiar, clearly generated by AI. And the messaging patterns were also identical. Channel News Asia, one of our local media outlets in Singapore, has even created a dedicated desk to detect disinformation and monitor inauthentic activity on platforms like Facebook during the 2025 elections. So the landscape continues to shift. For all we know, those disinformation actors might be even holding their own conferences or their own fellowships, you know, to train and innovate and improve. And so the work that we need to do continues. Because what we're dealing with is not just fake content, but we're also dealing with fake accounts. And we can distinguish between bots, those that are run by AI, but also bot accounts. You know, in the Philippines, for example, influence operators, they rent real people's social media accounts. So you might see a swarm of accounts posting the same political message or engaging in copy-pasting operations. Sometimes it gets funny because some of these workers would even forget to delete the instruction. So when they post their message, there's also the instruction on what time you need to post this, or instructions from the head of the troll armies, I guess. These are real accounts owned by real individuals, but for a certain period, someone else is controlling them. And so, you know, you might see an account that normally posts Bible verses or family updates, then suddenly they're posting politically charged content. You know, it's because someone else has taken over that account for a period of time. A Facebook or a Telegram group may start as a K-pop fan group. You know, those of you who know BTS, any BTS armies here, or a Taylor Swift fan group. And in a few weeks, once it becomes very popular, it becomes a political page. That means this group has been sold, you know, to a political operator. And with AI, as I've said, landscape has become more challenging. We're seeing not just text or photo manipulations, but also like audio deepfakes, video deepfakes, harder to detect for, you know, ordinary people. In Singapore, for example, both the former Prime Minister of Singapore and the current Prime Minister have been targeted. Their AI-generated images and voices were used in scams to persuade people to invest in fake schemes. This is not unique to Singapore. Similar cases are emerging across many countries involving deep fakes. So one question that I've been thinking about, especially during my time here at BRIAS, is whether the framework that I think is emerging, from the studies that I've done, can also be applied, to these newer problems that we're seeing, such as online scams and influence operations. I have recent grants that I've received this year are now focusing on online scams and influence operations. I'm also looking at conspiracy theories, trying to go beyond individual pieces of fake news. One reason that fake news is persuasive is that it taps into larger belief systems. Your conspiracy theories, social myths, some sociologists also refer to deep stories. These are broader sets of beliefs that create a worldview that makes people more susceptible to everyday falsehoods. So while fact-checking is important, making sure that we correct every significant wrong claim that we encounter, without addressing the larger belief systems, they may still be not effective. What we'll do is we'll just be correcting newer and newer versions that feed from the same large belief system. And so it is, I think, addressing these deeper layers, that increase susceptibility to day-to-day misinformation and disinformation. This is the space within which I hope to continue my work. And so through the BRIAS program, I've come to realize that the research that we do, it's not only about information integrity, but it's also very much about preserving democracy. And to my math teacher, no, Lucifer is not God. Pope Francis is not the devil. It's those who deceive people and attack the truth. So thank you very much to BRIAS, and I look forward to your inputs and perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have now a bit of time to pose some questions to you or interact a bit academically. Who would like to kick things off?
Thank you so much. This was really, really interesting. And also, I think on this side of the world, we often get it on studies about this, mostly centered on US. So it was really interesting also to see another geographical area of the world. I have two questions. One, and I really would like to know your I don't know if there are really answers to this, but maybe you have an educated guess. I was a few months ago at a lecture by an historian who also does disinformation, and he said something like, so his main argument was, well, disinformation, it's not something new. Disinformation always existed. And during history, we called it propaganda. It was actually more difficult to fact-check things because, for example, if you would have a Nazi government or a fascist government, there was basically... You can also think now of some more authoritarian regimes, Russia. There is basically no way actually to fact-check things or to find reliable sources. So his claim was that what is important in disinformation, it's two things. It's exposure, because when you think of different times in history, you could basically not be informed. Now it's really difficult, right, to shield yourself from disinformation. And the other one is timing. So he said, for example, when it comes to political information specifically, it will normally hit you more during electoral campaign, during certain moments of the year, right? So I was wondering whether you agree with this, whether you think it's true from these cases that you look at. Is it exposure? If it is exposure, how this affects beliefs, behaviors? Is just a higher exposure can we isolate the effect of it? And the second question I have is, it relates to research I saw on fake news, mostly in US. And the figure that I remember was that 80%, about 80% of fake news, also during electoral campaign, was produced by far-right sources. And I was wondering, you talked a lot, and I really appreciate that, about beliefs, about the system of beliefs that basically confirm it is confirmed the fake news. You don't engage if you think it's a fake news and you don't believe in it. You don't have a stake. You already know it's fake. I wonder, you now showed us, what it does or what it doesn't do to correct specific disinformation. Does it even make sense? I mean, isn't it enough to basically have reliable sources that create a baseline that are widely available? Or does it make sense, since we know, right, people that are informed know, and we also know from literature on engaging with fake news, that actually the more educated you are, the more you are going to be able to find argument to argue for your own view. So does it make sense to fight intensively fake news? Or we have to, surrender to the fact it always exists. It's a high exposure. We just need to give a baseline for what is a reliable information.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. Okay, for the first one. I agree that disinformation has been around, but I think what we're seeing is just the scale, the speed within which it spreads. I think has become much faster. Exposure, I think, is important. But at the same time, and that's why the role of tech platforms are very important, because they have the resources and the responsibility to ensure that their spaces, don't become the playground, for falsehoods. So it's a form of harm, and it is the responsibility to keep those spaces safe. But at the same time, the other side of the equation is we also need to we are also confronted by people's personal biases, and because there is a strong motivation to spread particular types of falsehoods, we can do our best to control, limit the exposure, but people will find other ways, to reach their targets. And so I think exposure plays an important role, but I think that's not the only factor that facilitates it. Because, we will not have any problem if everyone who's exposed just realizes it's not true, right? We wouldn't have that issue. But at the same time, it's also very difficult to limit exposure, because on social media, it's just very difficult to monitor everything that's happening on social media now. I think the second question, I think that's a more challenging. Both are challenging questions anyway, but I feel like, is it even worth it to try, right, to fight this? With corrections, with fact checks, there have been studies that also found that benefits from having fact checkers around is not just from the individual fact checks that they produce, but people, these bad actors, knowing that there are groups checking on them, monitoring what they post, hopefully will serve as a deterrent, to these bad actors. We know that a lot of them are not deterred; they're still finding different ways. But I think having fact checkers, it's the same with journalists. Journalism's benefits to society is not just the actual article that is produced, but also knowing that there are journalists around, and that there are people who are monitoring what's happening around the world. So I think that's the importance of still having these corrections around. My current project, I think, with the conspiracy theories project, one thing that we're focusing on really is trying to understand confirmation bias and what are the ways that we can deal with it. Because the thing is, fact checks, corrections, other types of information are always received through the lens of our biases, so you might show someone a fact check to say that, okay, what you think is true is actually false. Is actually what you think is real is actually not real or untrue or AI generated. But when they interpret that through the lens of their biases, they would say that, yeah, you see, everyone is conspiring against us. You're okay. You're the smart one. But we're. So I think more than factual corrections, we need to look at how best to deal with confirmation biases, because I think it filters a lot of the interventions that we develop. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I'm thinking now. Yes.
Okay. Next up. Thank you, Edson, for your talk. It was really illuminating. Also, to see the Asian context, and I found the globalization part really interesting, where we talked about how the similarities of misinformation that I could also see when my studies of misinformation in Greece, for example, very similar things circulating. I have also two questions. One is about the role of news media in these countries, because despite the similarities you reported in the countries you or your co-authors in your edited volume examined, these countries are way different in terms of press freedom. So, and presumably how trustworthy the news media are in these countries by academics, experts, but also by the public. Does that play a role? We want to believe it does, but I'm not sure. It plays a huge role. And secondly, my second question, you partly answered it now with your second answer, but when I did a study recently on misinformation beliefs in Greece, tracing how headlines of fake news have been circulated on the Greek internet or news media, how many people believe in them. Then we included with my co-authors a couple of statements that were actually fake news, meaning we came up with some fake news and we put it up there, and there was a significant minority of people who told us, yeah, I believe that this is true. So it might not just be exposure, as you mentioned, but it could be a conspiratorial mindset that's increasing. But I wonder that's connected to what you just said about the confirmation bias. But I wonder if you have any ideas on why we see this increasing in many places in the world, probably not everywhere, but is it something about the architecture of platforms, but is it more deeper related to social structures and trust in institutions? I would like to have your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So for the first one, I think the context does matter. Like in let me just go back to that slide. We have a paper that's been under review for a while. So if you happen to be assigned as a reviewer for this, I'm kidding. So we from the 10 cities survey that we conducted, we tried to do some multi-level analyses as well. We look at country level indices also, and try to see whether those influence. In this case, we were trying to predict their self-reported frequency of encountering fake news, a proxy measure to how they perceive how serious the problem is in their respective cities. We included press freedom. We see that is a positive predictor, but it's a very small effect size. But for me, what's interesting is how in countries that score high in media integrity, there's a negative relationship with perception that there's so much fake news. So I think the quality of media that you have in your country, I think is also an important context. Yep. For the second question, I think it's interesting, like what is happening in the world, right? There are some scholars who've also tried to develop a conspiratorial mentality scale. The argument is some people are just predisposed to thinking in a conspiratorial way, that everything is just a conspiracy. We tried to measure that in Singapore. My expectation was older people will score higher in conspiratorial mentality. What we found was a negative relationship with age. It's actually younger people in Singapore who exhibit higher levels of conspiratorial thinking. So there's something that maybe is happening with this generation. Aside from that, there's also this wave of anti anti-intellectualism. I think part of attacks hostility towards the media, as you probably would also find in your studies, is also rooted in, is also part of this wave of anti-intellectualism. Where is this coming from? That one I'm not sure. I think it's an important question. But I think there is something with this generation. There are now some countries implementing social media bans. If that is effective, we might be seeing a real life lab experiment to see whether generations that are raised within a context where they cannot use social media until they're 16, whether they would exhibit some differences, but yeah, I currently, it's a good question. I've not thought about it, but you're right. I think there's something that's happening. I don't know if it's in the water. Okay.
All right, questions left?
Good afternoon. Thank you for your lecture, Edson. It was extremely interesting, and it's so good that you are also working on doing research on the solutions and try to grasp to what extent they produce some positive results as well. So my question is in this direction. In terms of fact-checking, have you identified any potential difference? And I'm asking this question in terms of policy solutions and the possibility to cross-load them to other countries. Whether the fact-checkers are private or public actors. So they might be public media outlets, or they can be private organizations, right? Of engaged citizens or of journalists, but not being publicly funded, because at least in Spain, and I guess this is the case in many countries, when public institutions provide funding for a social project, and this can be considered a social project, right? The organization needs to disclose who are the funders. So for those people having this confirmation bias, if they read the fact check, but they can also check who's funding the fact checkers, then this falls into this, again, conspiracy that, but the woke institutions are funding the fact checkers, so what do you expect from the fact checking process, right? So in terms of credibility of the fact checkers and strategies to get to different publics with the fact check counter news or counter stories, but also in terms of exposure. So the fake news is circulating widely on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, but the fact checkers, where should they post? Or depending on who these fact checkers are, they might not be well positioned to actually counteract the message, because will they be paying for inserted propaganda, if you're allowed to comment like this, on YouTube, for example, where many people might have found the initial fake news. So on your broad investigation of that, have you identified good solutions on this problem?
Thanks for those questions. So I've done some work with fact checkers, but more on like understanding their work processes, also their impact on fake news beliefs, but we've not really looked at perceptions of credibility. One study that we did, we just compared the different fact-checking websites, and we know that if you're affiliated with a newsroom versus not affiliated with a newsroom, some of your what we call transparency rituals will be different. We see that those who are not affiliated with a traditional journalistic actor, they tend to be more transparent with their funding sources, who they are. But those who are within journalism organizations, they tend to be less transparent with these details. And I think part of that is they think that, okay, since we're with this news organization, you just need to believe us because we already have that credible legacy institution backing us. But you're right, in other contexts, being affiliated with a particular legacy institution can backfire. I can think of, for example, in South Korea, one of, I would say, the earlier academic-based fact checkers they at some point they were working closely with news media organizations, and the reason is because in South Korea, news organizations are less trusted than in other contexts, or there's consistently low trust in traditional news media in South Korea. And so when news organizations, if they try to come up with their own fact-checking initiatives, that can backfire. So one solution was to see whether hosting it, having an academia-based fact checker might work better. We see that in Hong Kong as well. One of the more successful fact checking initiatives, Annie Lab, is within a university. But one thing that's also unique in Asia is that there are government fact check initiatives. I think we see this in, if I remember it right, I think there's one in Vietnam, I think there's one in Indonesia. But as you would also expect, this also impacts how people perceive them. I remember. I think we're being recorded, so I'll tell you later. I'm kidding. So I think definitely the one is funding is an issue. How do you get funding? But how you get funding can also affect, how, as you mentioned, how people perceive fact checkers. So at least in one thing that we've observed is working is more of a community-based fact-checking. There's one that was started in Taiwan, for example, COFAX. They rely a lot on volunteer engineers, and the service is if you're unsure about something, you send it via Line, which is their a messaging app that's popular there, and so they build this database. At some point, if people ask the same thing, it can be easily fact-checked, and their fact-checkers are volunteers. So that appears to be successful in Taiwan. The one that we work with in Singapore, Checkmate, is also a volunteer basis, and I think they're very conscious of that to preserve perceptions of credibility, that you're not affiliated with. So on one hand, since it's a volunteer basis, you don't need a lot of resources. You don't need to pay employees, and you don't have the baggage of trying to self-declare your funders, because you don't have funders. But the issue is sustainability and how much you can scale, your operations, because volunteers, they also have their full-time jobs. So I guess there is really no solution there. I think that what's important is having different groups engaged in fact-checking will be important, so that different groups of people can go to the source that I think makes sense for them. But it's also important for these different types of fact-checking groups to work together, to collaborate. Yeah. I think that there was I probably missed on the second one, but yeah, we can discuss that later as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Some questions left. There was a person there, and I'll give you the floor afterwards.
Thank you very much for this cool presentation. And I really like that slide about cognitive, motivational, and social dimensions, 3 aspects. Yeah, and this is just a short question about, do you think that people's motives change over time? And do you think that cognitive aspect is maybe the same, like universal something? So maybe this is the question for psychologists, but I would like to hear your opinion.
Yeah, this is a very good question, because it is exactly I think a discussion that we're having in our research team. We have just finished collecting data. We tried to repeat the 10-city survey, so we've finished collecting data from the last 4 cities a week or 2 weeks ago. And in this round, we also tried to measure motivations for authentication, what would make people want to verify claims, because it's not all the time that you don't have the capacity to try to authenticate everything. So what would make you authenticate? And our debate was whether do we come up with, how do we even come up with a scale to measure that motivation? Is it something that's stable, that you're just motivated to authenticate or not, or is it something also very contextual, that for some sorts of topics, at certain periods of time, your motivation might be high, but maybe not for others. So I don't have a definitive answer. What we tried in that instrument is to try to ask both. So we had statements that try to measure motivations as a more of a stable trait, but we also tried to focus on a specific topic and ask whether they're likely to authenticate this claim. If that makes sense. So I guess it's a non-answer to your question.
Thank you.
But that's how we navigated, is to just measure both. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edson, for your very interesting lecture. I have a question about the anti-fake news law in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious. Never heard of it before. Could you just explain a little more how it operates?
Mm-hmm.
And were you able to see or measure any great outcomes of that? And are there any other prototype laws like that around, like in Asia or anywhere in the world? So yeah, it's just a question of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. So there were attempts in other countries, but I would say that at least in Asia, the one in Singapore is the one that has endured. There was one that was, I think, passed or almost passed in Malaysia, but when the change of administration, they also then repealed the law. How it works in Singapore is that the orders come from ministers, so only ministers are empowered to issue correction notices or take down orders. So if the ministry comes across something that they think is false, the first course of action is the minister orders a correction order. So a correction order is basically telling the person who posted to not take down the post, but to display a correction from the state, from the government. And so if you Google it now, you might still see some posts on Facebook where the post that was questioned is still there. It would just accompany another message that says that links you to the government correction. So that's a correction order. And I think like Facebook, when they agreed to do this, the language they use is something like Facebook or the Singapore government claims that this is untrue or this is fake. So also a bit sarcastic in there, in how they implemented that. But that's the correction order, is that the original post is still there, but you are ordered to show the correction alongside the original post. If the person refuses, then they could also order the social media platform to post that correction. Or there have also been cases where a news organization, was also given order to post that correction. A takedown order is when people refuse to put the correction, that they can then issue a takedown order where the original message has to be taken down. If the person does not comply still, then that's when they go to internet service providers or social media platforms. Yeah. So far, if I remember it right, there's just been one case of people refusing a correction order and has elevated it to the courts. Most of the time, people have complied with the correction order and have displayed the correction alongside their original post. Yeah, so that's how it works. Whether it's effective or not, again, it depends on who you ask. We did an experiment on this, tried to show participants a correction under the POFMA law, a correction from a third-party fact-checker, and no correction. What we found is having a correction is effective in lowering beliefs in the original fake news, whether it's from POFMA or from a third-party correction. But a third-party fact-check is better, more effective than the POFMA correction. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies in advance. I know that Ike invited academic questions, but I'm going to ask a question as a concerned citizen. If that is also, I waited a bit so that I was not the first one to ask a question. But Edson, thanks a lot for your extremely insightful presentation, and also how you connected dots throughout your various stages of your academic career and publications. It's actually also a very nice template to remember. So thanks a lot also on that level. But my question and jumps up from the question that were asked about the solutions. Because of course the legal action that you just discussed, of course, is horribly slow. It's a horribly slow response, and it's also within national boundaries, right? And your research shows that actually fake news doesn't bother all that much with national borders. So, okay, we need something fast. And the fastest tool we have now that also operates globally is, of course, AI. And so you discussed in your presentation the problems, then you discussed some solutions, and then you embarked on the topic of AI. You see, I paid attention to the template of your presentation closely. So AI is a problem. We all know that it creates massive challenges, extremely big advantages as well, but also many challenges. And is there anything out there that also discusses, or do you have thoughts based on your research, how AI could be like a speedy fact check, somehow?
Yep.
And it could also, I could also see it function within a legal framework, but it's quick.
Yeah. Yeah, there are lots of efforts within Singapore. Our center is also partnering with another research center and they're more tech facing. What we call them A-Star, and they're trying to develop an automated fact checking service that would be very quick. And the way we come in is that what we're trying to do is, instead of just showing people that, okay, this is correct or this is incorrect, this is true or false, by crawling, their training data, that we can also direct people to a platform that we're building to say that, oh, this fake news, this is not unique. There has been a similar claim in the past, and this is tagged into this, conspiracy theory or a larger belief system. So there are efforts to leverage AI to automate the fact checking, but the thing is, those who create fake news are also leveraging AI. The deep fakes are so good now that before you can say, oh, if there are like an extra finger, then sure, so Netanyahu had to show that he still has like 5 fingers. But the technology is advancing really fast, and it's becoming more and more difficult to detect. So there are also some research, and I'm not part of it, but I know from some of my friends that they're also trying to then play catch up and see whether we can use AI to detect AI. There are some efforts to also then work with certain information institutions to, okay, if you come up with an image or a video, can we as a community agree on certain signatures or certain ways to plant a few things that can be a signature, we will know where this originally came from. And without that signature, maybe we shouldn't trust that. So there are some efforts. But again, yeah, we're dealing with really shrewd actors as well. So, yeah.
Okay, great. I think there's one final question left, and afterwards I will invite all of you to join us for a drink and continue the discussion over there. Please.
Thank you for allowing me a final question. And thank you for the presentation. I think it was extremely interesting. I'm a political scientist, so I really liked the communication perspective and lots of great, interesting data. Also how things locally played out in the context I find very interesting. But as a political scientist, one of the things I was wondering about is that today the VDEM report came out, and this report tries to classify states according to their level of democracy and so on. And you discussed data in the context of some liberal democracies and some autocracies. And one of the questions I had is like, when we're talking about combating fake news, is that an important variable? Does it matter, or is the challenge actually very similar? That's my question.
Okay, can you repeat the last part?
So is the challenge in combating fake news, is it very similar in democracies and autocracies according to you, or is it very different? That's my question.
Interesting question, because something I also had in mind when I invited these collaborators to contribute their chapters, so for example, I read the chapter about China with lots of interest, because I wanted to see like how does fake news play out in a tightly controlled media system, so would they even have fake news to begin with, and they still have, but a lot of them, they're not the political fake news that we see in other contexts, but a lot of it has to do with food, with medicine, with science, So and there's also the exploitation of disinformation to extort money from businesses and people. So some case studies done in China, there are cases where they would threaten to release like fake reviews or just come up with fake news to then extort money from businesses. Okay, you have to pay us if you don't want us to release this. So, but yeah, you're right. I think the problem pans out differently across different contexts. In Singapore, which is also I would say a closely regulated media system, I am also surprised with the kinds of fake news that we encounter. Of course, during COVID, a lot of these were about health and food and science. But for people to even create deep fakes of the current Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, I think that's quite brazen, and of course these are probably created from outside, but within the internet, these can just within the high levels of social media use in Singapore and the very efficient internet speeds, it's just easy for Singaporeans to be exposed to posts that are created or even are spreading outside Singapore. How exactly these different countries are different in terms of how they're facing the problem. I think one is the types of fake news that we're seeing. I think that's one. But I think the problem still pans out in unique ways, even in tightly controlled media systems. Yeah. But that's also an empirical question. So I think something that can be studied as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your questions and interactions. Thank you, Edson Tandoc, for enlightening us with close to a decade of research. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to have a drink together and close off this beautiful day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.